Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes life doesn't go the way we planned. We've all been there setting goals, making decisions, laying out our futures with the confidence that everything will fall into place. But then out of nowhere, things take a turn. The door we thought would open stays firmly shut. The opportunity we prayed for slips through our fingers. The carefully designed plan begins to unravel. It's in moments like these that we're tempted to feel frustrated, disappointed, or even disheartened. But let me remind you today, what looks like a disruption to your plan is often a divine redirection from God. When God interrupts our plans, it's not to harm us or take away our joy. It's because He has something better in store. He sees the big picture, the things we cannot see. We're limited in our perspective. We base our plans on what we know and what we can understand, but God operates on a higher level. His vision isn't confined to the present moment or our current circumstances. He knows what's around the corner. He sees the pitfalls we're blind to, the obstacles we're not prepared for, and the blessings we can't yet imagine. So, when God steps in and interrupts your plans, it's not a mistake. It's a rescue, a recalibration, a redirection toward His greater purpose for your life. Think about Jonah in the Bible. God had called him to go to Nineveh. Jonah had other plans. He decided to run in the opposite direction, boarding a ship to Tarshish. But God interrupted Jonah's journey. A storm arose, and Jonah found himself thrown into the sea, swallowed by a giant fish. Now, that wasn't part of Jonah's plan. It seemed like everything was going wrong, but God was orchestrating the entire process to bring Jonah back to His purpose. God's interruption wasn't punishment, it was correction. It was a divine redirection to get Jonah back on track. The same is true for us. We might not be swallowed by a fish, but we all face moments when God disrupts our plans. Maybe it's a job you didn't get, a relationship that ended, or a dream that didn't materialize. It's easy to feel like you failed or that life is unfair. But what if that disappointment was God's way of protecting you from something that wasn't right for you? What if He's redirecting you to something far better than you ever imagined? I've heard stories of people who were devastated when they didn't get the promotion they worked so hard for, only to realize later that God was positioning them for an entirely different career that brought them more fulfillment and impact than they ever thought possible. I've seen others heartbroken over a relationship that ended, only to meet someone who was truly the partner God had prepared for them. These aren't coincidences, they're divine interventions. They're God stepping in and saying, I have something better for you. Trust me. But let's be honest, it's not always easy to trust in the middle of the interruption. When things fall apart, our first instinct is to try to fix them, to hold on tightly to our plans and force them to work. But the more we resist, the more frustrated we become. That's why it's so important to shift our perspective. Instead of seeing interruptions as obstacles, we need to see them as opportunities. Opportunities to grow, to learn, and to align ourselves with God's will. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He had dreams of greatness, but his life took a very different path than he expected. His brothers betrayed him. He was sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. For years, it seemed like his life was going in the wrong direction. But through it all, God was working. Each interruption was a step toward Joseph's ultimate destiny as a ruler in Egypt, where he would save countless lives, including his own family. Joseph's story reminds us that God's redirections are not random, they're purposeful. They're preparing us for something far greater than we can see in the moment. So when your plans are interrupted, don't lose heart. Don't let frustration take over. Instead, take a step back and ask God, what are you trying to teach me? Where are you leading me? You might not get the answer right away, but trust that He's working behind the scenes. Every closed door, every detour, every disappointment is part of His plan to guide you toward the destiny He's prepared for you. There are times in life when we encounter closed doors, moments where it feels like everything we've worked for is slipping away. It can be disheartening when we pour our energy, time, and hope into a plan, only to see it fail or find the opportunity we've been striving for suddenly unavailable. But those closed doors aren't the end of the story. In fact, they are often the very means by which God redirects us towards something far greater. What may feel like rejection is actually redirection. It's a divine step for an open destiny that aligns perfectly with His will for your life. When we face a closed door, our natural response is often to try and force it open. We push, we pull, we strategize, and we strive, thinking that if we just work hard enough or pray long enough, we can make it happen. But God knows better. He knows which doors will lead to fulfillment and which ones will lead to frustration. He knows what's best for you, even when it's not what you expected or wanted at the time. So when a door closes, it's not because God is withholding something good from you. It's because He's protecting you and positioning you for something better. Consider the story of Paul in the Bible. He had a heart to spread the gospel and planned to go to Asia, but Scripture tells us that the Holy Spirit prevented him from doing so. It must have been confusing for Paul. He was doing something good, something noble, yet God closed that door. Why? because there was a greater mission waiting for him in Macedonia. Had Paul forced his way into Asia, he would have missed the divine opportunity God had prepared. The closed door wasn't a rejection of Paul's mission. It was a redirection to the place where he could have the greatest impact. In our own lives, we experience similar moments. Perhaps it's a job you applied for that didn't materialize. You were qualified, experienced, and ready, but the answer was no. At the time, it might feel like we've been passed over or that you're not good enough, but often, it's God closing the door because he has a better opportunity waiting. Maybe it's a relationship that didn't work out, one you thought was the one, only to have it end unexpectedly. That heartbreak might sting in the moment, but it could be God sparing you from a situation that wasn't right or preparing you for someone who truly complements your purpose. One thing to remember is that a closed door doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean you've missed your chance or that God has forgotten about you. On the contrary, it's often a sign that he's actively involved in your life, shaping your path and guiding your steps. He's aligning circumstances, orchestrating connections, and preparing opportunities that you couldn't even dream of. If you could see the full picture of what he's doing behind the scenes, you'd understand why that door had to close. Sometimes the door that closes is one we've never meant to walk through in the first place. Maybe it looked good on the surface, but God saw what was behind it. He saw the challenges, the setbacks, and the struggles that would have come with it. Other times, the closed door is simply a matter of timing. The opportunity might be right, but timing isn't. God knows when we're ready, and he won't allow us to step into something prematurely. He's not in a hurry. He's more interested in preparing us for lasting success than giving us a temporary win. Think about the story of Ruth. After losing her husband, she could have felt that every door in her life had closed. She was in a foreign land with no clear future. But God was working. As she followed Naomi and trusted God's leading, doors began to open. She met Boaz, became part of his family, and ultimately played a role in the lineage of Jesus Christ. The closed door of her first marriage led her to a destiny she couldn't have imagined. It's a reminder that God's plans are always better than our own, even when we can't see it in the moment. There's also a refining process that happens when doors close. It tests our faith, builds our character, and teaches us to trust in God's sovereignty. It's in those moments of uncertainty and waiting that we grow the most. We learn to lean not on our own understanding, but to acknowledge him in all our ways, trusting that he will direct our paths. Those closed doors are not roadblocks. They are stepping stones to the open doors God has prepared for us. There are times in life when everything seems to be falling apart. The plans you worked so hard to build are crumbling, and the path you thought was clear suddenly feels full of obstacles. In those moments, it's natural to feel confused or even defeated. But what if those challenges, those unexpected detours, were actually part of something much bigger? What if God is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating events in ways you can't yet understand? What if he is rearranging the pieces of your life to create a masterpiece far greater than anything you could imagine? Trusting in God's bigger picture means believing that even when things don't make sense, he's still in control and his plans for your good. God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and his perspective goes far beyond what we can see. We often try to fit life into neat little boxes, relying on our own logic and understanding to figure things out. But God operates on a different level. He sees the end from the beginning. He knows how every piece fits together, not just in your life, but in lives of those around you. What might seem like chaos or confusion to us is, in reality, a carefully crafted plan unfolding according to his divine will. Take Joseph, for example. When he was sold into slavery by his brothers, he couldn't have known that God was positioning him for greatness. He couldn't have seen how the years of hardship and injustice would ultimately lead him to become second in command in Egypt, saving countless lives during a famine. If Joseph had focused only on the immediate circumstances, he might have given up. But God had a bigger picture in mind. What looked like a series of unfortunate events was actually a journey of preparation, shaping Joseph into the leader he was destined to be. In our own lives, we might face similar seasons of uncertainty. A job opportunity falls through, a relationship ends, or a dream seems out of reach. It's tempting to question why these things are happening or to feel as though life is unfair. But if we step back and trust in God's bigger picture, we can begin to see that every twist and turn has a purpose. That rejection may have saved you from something that wasn't meant for you. That delay may have been necessary to prepare you for what's next. Every piece of the puzzle has a role to play, even the ones that don't seem to make sense at first. Trusting in God's bigger picture also means letting go of the need to control everything. We often want all the answers up front. We want to know how things will work out and why certain things are happening. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith is about stepping forward even when you can't see the whole path. It's about believing that God is guiding your steps even when the way forward feels uncertain. When you let go of the need to control and surrender to his plan, You open yourself up to the incredible things he has in store. There's a beautiful story in the Bible about a man named Gideon. When God called him to lead Israel against the Midianites, Gideon felt unqualified and overwhelmed. To make matters worse, God kept reducing the size of Gideon's army until only 300 men were left to face an enemy far greater in number. From a human perspective, the situation looked impossible, but God had a bigger picture in mind. He used that small, unlikely group to achieve a miraculous victory, showing that his power is made perfect in our weakness. Gideon didn't need to understand every detail of the plan. He just needed to trust that God was in control. In your own life, you might be facing a situation that feels impossible. You might be wondering why things aren't going according to your plan. But remember, God's ways are higher than your ways. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater. What feels like a loss is often a gain in disguise. You don't have to understand the entire plan. You just have to trust the one who holds the plan in his hands. Trusting in God's bigger picture requires patience. And that's not always easy. We live in a world that values instant gratification, where waiting feels like wasted time. But God's timing is perfect. He is never early and he is never late. He knows exactly when to open doors and when to close them. He knows when you're ready and when you need more time to grow. It's in the waiting that your faith is tested and strengthened. It's in the waiting that you learn to rely on him completely. When you look back on your life, you'll see that the moments of uncertainty and struggle were often the moments when God was working the most. The times when you thought everything was falling apart were actually the times when he was putting everything together. Trust that he is weaving a story far more beautiful and intricate than anything you could create on your own. Faith often grows the most in the moments when we don't have all the answers. It's easy to trust God when everything is going smoothly, when our plans are falling into place, and when life feels predictable and secure. But true faith is forged in the unknown, in those seasons where nothing seems to make sense, and the future feels uncertain. It's in those moments when we're forced to let go of control that we come to truly rely on God. The unknown isn't a place to fear. It's a place where miracles are born and where God's presence becomes undeniable. When we find ourselves in situations where we can't see the outcome, our natural inclination is often to worry or try to take matters into our own hands. We want to fix things, find solutions, and make the unknown more manageable. But faith asks us to do something different. Faith asks us to surrender, to let go of our need to know every detail, and to trust that God is working for our good, even when we can't see it. It's not about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. Consider Abraham's story. God called him to leave his homeland and go to a place he didn't even know. He didn't give Abraham a detailed roadmap or a clear destination. He simply said, "Go to the land I will show you." That required incredible faith. Abraham had to step out into the unknown, trusting that God would guide him each step of the way. And because he was willing to trust, God not only led him to the promised land, but also made him the father of many nations. Abraham's journey shows us that the unknown is not a void to fear, but an opportunity to walk closely with God. Faith grows in the unknown because it forces us to rely on God in ways we never would if everything were certain. When life is predictable, it's easy to lean on our own understanding, our own strength, and our own resources. But when we're faced with challenges that are beyond our control, we have no choice but to turn to God. And it's in those moments of dependence that we experience his power, his provision, and his peace in ways that transform us. The unknown stretches us, but it also strengthens us. There's a story in the Gospels about Peter walking on water. When Jesus called him to step out of the boat, Peter had to leave behind the safety of what he knew and step into the uncertainty of the waves. At first, he walked with confidence, but the moment he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the wind and the waves, he began to sink. That's what happens when we let fear take over in the unknown. But even as Peter sank, Jesus reached out and caught him. This story reminds us that even when we falter in our faith, God's hand is always there to steady us. The unknown isn't a place to fear. It's a place to fix our eyes on him and trust that he won't let us fall. Sometimes the unknown is where we discover the depth of God's love and faithfulness. It's where we see him provide in ways we never expected. Think about the Israelites in the wilderness. They didn't have a clear path forward, and they didn't know where their next meal would come from. But God provided manna from heaven each day, enough to sustain them. He led them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. In the uncertainty of the wilderness, they experienced God's presence, provision in tangible ways. The unknown became a place of daily dependence on him. Faith in the unknown also teaches us to live in the moment. When we're focused on trying to figure out the future, We miss the opportunities and blessings right in front of us. The unknown invites us to let go of the what ifs and whens and to embrace the present with trust and gratitude. It's a reminder that God's grace is sufficient for today and that He will give us what we need for tomorrow when the time comes. It's in the unknown that God often does His greatest work in us. He uses the uncertainty to refine our character, build our resilience, and draw us closer to Him. It's a process that can be uncomfortable and even painful at times, but it's also incredibly rewarding. When we look back on those seasons, we often see how much we grew, how much we learned, and how God's hand was guiding us every step of the way. The unknown isn't a place of abandonment, it's a place of transformation. God's plans for our lives are always better than our own. As humans, we tend to dream and plan based on what we know, what we want, and what we think is best for us. We set goals, map out our future, and work hard to bring those plans to life. But so often, the plans we create for ourselves fall short of the incredible things God has prepared for us. His plans are not only better, but they are also perfect, designed specifically for us in ways that exceed anything we could ever ask for or imagine. When our plans don't work out, it's easy to feel disappointed or frustrated. We may wonder why things didn't go the way we expected or why God didn't answer our prayers the way we hoped. But what we see as a failure or loss is often God's way of redirecting us to something greater. He knows the end from the beginning, and His perspective is far beyond ours. He sees the opportunities. We can't see the dangers we're unaware of and the blessings waiting for us on the other side of our obedience. When God closes a door, it's not because He wants to deny us, it's because He wants to lead us to something better. There's a verse in the Bible that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." This promise reminds us that God's plans are always for our good. Even when the path He takes us on is different from what we envisioned, we can trust that He is leading us to a place of blessing and purpose. His plans are rooted in His love for us, and because of that, we can have confidence that He is working all things together for our good. Think about the story of David. He started as a shepherd, a job that many would have seen as insignificant. Yet God had a plan for David's life that was far greater than anything he could have imagined. David wasn't just tending sheep, he was being prepared to become a king. God used the skills David developed in the fields, his courage, his leadership, his ability to trust God in difficult situations to prepare him for the throne. If David had clung to his own plans, he might have missed the incredible destiny God had for him. But because he trusted God's plan, he stepped into a life of purpose and impact that continues to inspire us today. Sometimes God's plans require us to wait, and waiting can be one of the hardest things to do. We live in a world that values speed and efficiency, and it can be challenging to trust in God's timing when we want things to happen now. But God's timing is perfect, and His delays are not denials. When we wait on Him, we're not wasting time, we're being prepared. God uses the waiting season to refine us, to build our character, and to prepare us for the blessings He has in store. It's in the waiting that we learn to trust Him more deeply and to rely on His strength rather than our own. There's a story in the Gospels about a man named Lazarus. When Lazarus became sick, his sisters, Mary and Martha, sent word to Jesus, asking Him to come and heal their brother. But instead of coming immediately, Jesus waited. By the time He arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. From Mary and Martha's perspective, it must have seemed like Jesus was too late. But God's plan was far greater than they could have imagined. Jesus didn't just heal Lazarus, He raised him from the dead, demonstrating His power and glory in a way that left no doubt about who He was. What looked like a delay was actually part of a bigger plan to reveal God's greatness. God's plans are not just about us, they're also about the people around us. He uses our lives to impact others, to bring hope and to point them to Him. When we trust His plan, we become part of something much bigger than ourselves. We become vessels of His love, grace, and purpose in the world. Our obedience to His plan not only blesses us, but also creates ripple effects that touch the lives of those around us. When we let go of our own plans and embrace God's, we find a freedom and a peace that can't be found anywhere else. We no longer have to carry the burden of trying to figure everything out or make things happen on our own. Instead, we can rest in the knowledge that God is in control and that His plans are always good. His plans may not always make sense to us in the moment, but they are always leading us toward a greater purpose. Trusting in His plan allows us to walk through life with confidence, knowing that He is guiding our steps and that His ways are always better than ours. When life takes an unexpected turn and your plans fall apart, it can feel like everything is unraveling. You may wonder why things didn't go the way you had hoped, why the job opportunity didn't come through, why the relationship didn't work out, or why the door you so desperately wanted to walk through was closed. In those moments, it's easy to feel discouraged, frustrated, or even abandoned. But the truth is, the very disruption you're experiencing may be the catalyst for something far greater than you could ever imagine. Sometimes God has to disrupt your plans to align you with your purpose. God's purpose for your life is always bigger than your plans. While we may have our own ideas about what we want to achieve, God sees the bigger picture. He knows your potential, your strengths, your weaknesses, and the impact your life is meant to have. When He disrupts your plans, it's not to harm you or to punish you. It's because He wants to position you for something greater, something that aligns with His perfect will. What feels like a setback is often a divine setup for your breakthrough. Think about Jonah in the Bible. He had his own plans, his own path he wanted to take. When God called him to go to Nineveh, Jonah chose to go in the opposite direction. He thought he could outrun God's purpose for his life, but God disrupted Jonah's plans in a dramatic way, sending a storm and a great fish to redirect him. It may have seemed like an interruption to Jonah, but it was really God's way of realigning him with his calling. Through that disruption, Jonah ultimately fulfilled his purpose and brought an entire city to repentance. God's disruption wasn't punishment, it was preparation. In our own lives, we often resist change and disruption because we fear the unknown. We like to feel in control, to know what's coming next, and to stick to the plans we've carefully laid out. But when we hold on too tightly to our plans, we can miss out on the greater things God has in store. His purpose requires us to be flexible, to trust Him even when the path isn't clear, and to embrace the opportunities that come through unexpected disruptions. Sometimes the disruptions we face are God's way of protecting us. He sees dangers and obstacles that we can't see. The job you didn't get might have been filled with challenges you weren't meant to endure. The relationship that ended might have led to heartache or pulled you away from your purpose. What you see as rejection may actually be God's redirection. His disruption is His way of saying, I have something better for you. Trust me. Disruptions also serve to refine us. They strip away our reliance on our own strength and plans, teaching us to depend on God. When everything is going smoothly, it's easy to lean on our own understanding. But in times of disruption, we're reminded of our need for Him. We're reminded that He is the one who holds our future and that His plans are far greater than anything we could create on our own. These moments of disruption can deepen our faith, build our character, and prepare us for the next season of our lives. Consider Joseph's journey. He had dreams of greatness, but his path to fulfilling those dreams was anything but straightforward. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused, and thrown into prison, Joseph's life was filled with disruptions. From the outside, it might have looked like everything was going wrong. But each disruption was part of God's plan to position Joseph for his destiny. Through those challenges, Joseph learned to trust God, to persevere, and to use his gifts in ways that ultimately led to him becoming second in command in Egypt. What looked like detours were actually stepping stones to his purpose. Disruptions can also open doors to new opportunities. They can push us out of our comfort zones and into places where we can grow, learn, and make an impact. When our plans are disrupted, it forces us to reevaluate, to seek God's guidance, and to take steps of faith we might not have taken otherwise. The very thing that feels like a setback could be the springboard that propels you into your calling. God's purpose is always worth the disruption. It may not make sense in the moment, and it may not be easy, but it is always good. When we surrender our plans to Him and trust His purpose, we can find peace even in the midst of uncertainty. We can rest in the knowledge that He is in control, that He is working all things together for our good, and that His plans will always prevail. In life, when our plans fall apart, it's not the end, it's a new beginning orchestrated by God. His ways are higher, His timing is perfect, and His purpose is greater than anything we could imagine. Trust in the disruptions, embrace the unknown, and know that God is leading you toward a future filled with His love, blessings, and perfect plan. What feels like a setback is often a setup for something extraordinary. Keep the faith and let Him guide you to the fullness of His purpose.